Hi, I'm Omar, and this is a presentation on the paper titled Empirical Evidence of Large Language Models' Influence on Human Spoken Communication, written by Yakura and his colleagues. This is a fairly recent paper written in 2025. So what is the paper asking? Essentially, the basic question is, are linguistic patterns in text reflected by text generated by ChatGPT and all of these other LLMs influencing the way that we humans speak? The reason this question is being asked is because it could potentially indicate deeper cognitive processes at play. And this is similar to the idea reflected in the Sapir-Whorf hypotheses that language influences the way we think. And it also connects to a deeper idea that there could be a closed cultural feedback loop, which is the prospect that ChatGPT, the text that it spits out, is influencing the way that we speak. And the way we speak and write is what ChatGPT is trained on. So that's like sort of interesting loop going on there. Some background on this paper is primarily focused on the lexicographic shift in language, so the choice of words, basically, and how often different words are used. There are also other differences in human versus machine-generated language, stuff like linguistic structure, reasoning, rhetoric, bias, all of these different factors. And like mentioned before, LLMs are trained on basically the cumulative textual knowledge of humanity, as the paper puts it. And the way we speak and language spreads is, first, we might imitate some of the words that ChatGPT gives us. There might be integration into our cognition. And then other people who don't use ChatGPT might also start using these words. And yeah, so the methodology of this paper. First, the words were extracted from stuff like research, emails, essays, articles, stuff like that. And then it was processed through ChatGPT, where it was given prompts like polish this text or improve this text. And then it went through a bunch of processing stuff, tokenization, normalization, essentially filters to get words, and then these words and their frequencies were compared against GPT-generated text, so the raw text versus the GPT-processed text, and a metric was deduced that quantified the extent to which a specific word was used by ChatGPT. And a positive score indicated more GPT, and a negative score indicated less GPT usage. And this is findings for some of the most commonly used words that ChatGPT preferred, stuff like delve, underscore, comprehend, bolster, all of these different examples. And the log odds ratio, like I said, is a metric for basing how much a word is preferred by ChatGPT. Now, looking at how post-GPT, once ChatGPT was released, how it influenced human word preference, essentially words were categorized into two different categories: treated words with higher ChatGPT scores and untreated words with baseline near zero ChatGPT scores. And the synthetic control is a model, a statistical construction that asks the question, what would have happened if a treated word if ChatGPT was never released? And the way it's calculated is by averaging similar words called donors that had the same usage pattern before ChatGPT was released. And there's like untreated donors, random donors, semantic donors. And basically you look at the before, and then the counterfactual is looked at, and then you compare it to the after of these donors. And based on that, you can deduce a causal change. And the answer was yes, there was a measurable, abrupt increase in the usage of ChatGPT words post-release of the models. And figure 2a shows causal evidence that humans are reproducing the cultural traits that ChatGPT exhibits. The limitation, however, of the findings from the YouTube dataset were that academic talks are often more scripted and more formal. So a set of over 770,000 conversational podcast episodes was looked at, which also showed a post-ChatGPT increase in the usage of the word delve, which shows concrete causal evidence. Now, what does this mean for humans and also LLMs? So you have the closed cultural feedback loop that I talked about earlier. Another important detrimental effect is the erosion of diversity in the vocabularies that we use, because once ChatGPT gives us these words and it becomes more ingrained in our lexicon, we can sort of be in a place where it's like a very homogeneous vocabulary that everyone uses. There could also be biases against people who tend to use ChatGPT and learn English from that as a source. For LLMs, of course, there's homogeneity because all these training data that we provide, it could become monotonous after a certain extent if we learn from ChatGPT that much. And there's also reduced social benefits because there's less novelty and creative output that ChatGPT is giving us. This connects back to how we use language and how it transmits. And if AI speech becomes something that's embedded in the way we speak, that could potentially pass down generations and influence human culture as a whole. This is a quasi-experiment because researchers are estimating the impact of a real-world event, which was the release of ChatGPT, and the consequences that it had. And it's not in a controlled traditional environment. And that also leads to the missing piece, which is you cannot have randomized assignment of the treatment because it's a real-world scenario.